Dr. Sam Richards is your professor. Exquisite, articulate, brilliant. But he's my little brother. In a few months, I'll be 79 years old. Next year, I'll be 80 years old. I know I don't look it. I know I do not look it. But the reason why I look this way, and I tell people this all the time, is because of a regimen that I would not recommend for my worst enemy. And that regimen is being in the penitentiary. And a lot of you already know this because you've heard me speak previously. Is being in the penitentiary for 52 years. And I was. I went into the penitentiary in 1969, long before any of you were even dreamt of. Probably before your mothers and fathers may have been born. But I went into penitentiary in 1969, July 18th, and man walked on the moon, July 20th, 1969. Where I was at, we didn't know man walked on the moon. And we wouldn't know that for another 2 years. Say, wait a minute. Something as monumental as man's first step or humankind's first step on the moon? And y'all didn't know about it? That's because we had no radio, which meant no music, no news. We had no television. We had no newspapers. We had no periodicals. We had no magazines. We had no books except for the Bible. The place that I was imprisoned was like another world, another dimension. So why was I there? Being young, impetuous, foolish, ignorant, I did something that I should not have done. And the act, even though unintentional, cost someone their life, which I did not intend. I did not mean for this to happen, but it did. So there was a penalty that I had to pay. When I went to court, when I was arrested, I went to court, went to trial, was found guilty, and I was sentenced to life in prison.
How old were you again?
I was 21.
21.
Your age, pretty much. But what a lot of people don't know is the punishment, life in prison, and you see it on television, that might be 13 years, might be 15 years, might be 20 years to life, might be 25 to life. But I was in Pennsylvania, and life in Pennsylvania has always been until you die. The judge does not have to say, I sentence you to life without the possibility of parole, because that would be being redundant. He just says life, and you knew what that meant. Imagine your age walking around in a place like that with that kind of burden on your shoulders, racked with grief, remorse for what happened, and thinking about constantly your mother, your father. It seemed like it was just yesterday that I was at the table, breakfast table with my brothers, eating cereal, cold cereal, milk, playing, and I'm reading off the cereal box. It seemed like this was just yesterday. And I'm here. Because as I said, punishment was being meted out. Now, the question should be asked, because as I said, life sentences was different across the entire nation. New York, 15 to life. Some other places, California, if you were sentenced to life, the first year that you were sentenced, you went up to see the parole board, and they would make a decision as to whether or not you would go home then or not. I didn't see the parole board until 52 years later.
52. 52 years later.
52 years
was the
after
first time you saw the parole board?
Yes, because I was doing life. Now, you ask the question, why am I here today? Why am I out? What happened if I was supposed to die there? You've all heard of the president's ability to exert executive pardon. You know, it's like some things that extended from the Magna Carta of royalty centuries ago. That same act, by the grace of God and the mercy of the King, I pardon you. Well, the same thing has been afforded the chief executive operating officer of the nation, which is the president. And the same thing is given, the same right, the same power is given to the governor of each state, which is like a little mini president. So the governor has the ability to pardon or commute any one sentence. And in Pennsylvania, that's a hard thing to do. Pennsylvania is a rough state in terms of punishment, which is what we're talking about. Now, when I was initially in prison in 1969, there were, again, being from Philadelphia, Go Birds, Super Bowl champs, wow. But being from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, we have some of the strictest laws in the nation. There was a time when I heard the term, when I was in prison, I had been in prison maybe 6, 7, 8 years now, and it was rough, dark, dank, dirty, dangerous, and devoid of humanity, pretty much. We were treated like animals, non-entities, numbers. Sometimes I have nightmares. I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of ugly stuff, a lot of horrible stuff, a lot of bad stuff. And I am not afraid to say that even today, almost 80 years old, some of it gives me nightmares. And I wake up and I look around like this. I say, oh, I'm home. I'm home. So when we first began to hear the term rehabilitation, we said, what, are they going to rebuild a house? Rehab something? What do they mean? They were talking about rehabilitating individuals. And this was the start, the beginning of that period philosophically in criminal justice when he said, let's move away from stark punishment and move toward a system that could educate, train, provide civics, knowledge, human contact, because we couldn't even touch people on the inside. You couldn't touch your visitor. You couldn't touch your mother when she came to see you. Again, I usually quite often go back to my interactions with my mother in those days because I might have been 20, 21 years old, but I was a kid, mentally, physically. I was growing, but I was still a kid. And I would lay in the cell and call my mother's name under the pillow so no one could hear me. And I say, Mom, oh. Which is why I go back to that statement I said when I said, look, I know I don't look almost 80 years old, but I would not recommend the regimen that prompted me to look this way, with no late nights, no drinking, no smoking, no choice foods, no late hours all night, no women, no men, no sex. Those kinds of things. And to do that year after year after year, decade after decade after decade. What makes a lot of people old out here is lifestyle and lifestyle choices. So.
But you didn't have lifestyle choices.
The ones we had were very stark.
Were very stark. Can you also, just by the way, how big was the place you were in for?
Okay.
Well, there's you and me right here.
Okay.
So
well, pretty much touch the walls. each wall. Now, I'm 6 feet tall, so I could pretty much touch the wall. Do like that, I'm touching the wall. Do like that, I'm touching the walls. That's the width of your cell. And I take 3.5 steps. I'm at the back of the cell now. Now, 1, 2, 3. I'm at the front of the cell. That's it. That's it. Say, wait a minute, and what's in that cell? Well, on this wall is what they call your bed.
What they call your bed.
Call your bed. The reason I say that is because we didn't sleep in beds. We slept in cots, a metal cot that was maybe 32 inches wide. In order to turn over in your sleep, you had to get up on one elbow and turn over in that same spot. Because to do otherwise, you'd fall out the bed. And the bed was metal framed. The floor was concrete. You would hurt yourself. Now, there was...
You would hurt yourself if you fell out of bed.
Oh, indeed.
And it happened.
Well, you quickly learned how to maneuver in that cell. If you had the misfortune, which I didn't for a long time, if you had the misfortune of being in the cell with another man, that took some doing. Personalities, attitudes, Wow, I've seen a lot of people hurt, even killed, because of disagreements in the cell. What was wrong? Well, he kept looking at me. He kept touching my stuff.
Wait a second. You're 6 feet. This is two people.
Yeah, that's a bunk bed here. There's a bunk. It's a bunk bed. There's a cot here and a cot over top of it. And there's a toilet sitting right by the head of the beds. Mm-hmm. Imagine if your cell partner was sick intestinally.
So like I'm over here. Oh wait, 6
okay.
feet.
You're there.
Okay.
This is the.
So the bed is here.
This is a small walkway between the beds and the table and the door. Small walkway that you would pace back, do this. Some guys did this all night, and your cell partner would say, "Man, sit down." Tired of that pacing. That might be the start of it. But you were confined in that very minute space. And I often likened it to living in a toilet, because the toilet was right there. And when you're locked in, and in the old days, we were locked in quite often. Well, that's when we talk about segregation, isolation, the whole. Rough places. But again, initially, I went into the system when there were 8 penitentiaries in the state of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. When I came home 3 years ago, there were almost 30. I said, wait a minute. It went from 8 penitentiaries, each one filled up with a certain amount of men and women. Mm-hmm. And when you came home, they were almost 30 penitentiaries. What happened? The criminal justice system blew up as a political response to what was happening everywhere. But remember, I'm old enough to have been born in the 40s. My early juvenile period was spent in the 50s, and in the 60s, I was a young man like you are, a young woman like you are, and going into the penitentiary. So I'm old enough to recognize there was a time when certain things just were not happening. So responses to social issues. Remember, this is before, I was around before civil rights, pretty much, the civil rights era. And in the 1960s, we began to see something happening that was amazing. That was amazing to me, amazing to us. That was a change, a cultural shift, a change in the food, a change in the music, a change in the art, a change in the way that we viewed authority.
Even as in society, not just in prison.
No, this is everywhere.